Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If you take your seats, I'd like to welcome you and our honored guests to the 2005 IRI Freedom Award Dinner. My name is Peter Madigan. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of the International Republican Institute. We're glad so many of you are here to join us tonight in a celebration of freedom and democracy. As many of you know, IRI Chairman Senator John McCain long ago insisted that the International Republican Institute seek private funds to help fulfill our very public mission. He encouraged us to reach out into the private sector and to tell the story of the IRI, and to ask people like you and your organizations to support our efforts, to encourage, nourish, and spread democracy throughout the world. And I must say, we're grateful for your support tonight. I wanted to tell you that I'm going to make two promises this evening. The first one is, this program will be short, crisp, and interesting. And the second one is that it will end on time, because as you know, our chairman and our honored guest like it that way. Now, there are a couple of people that I wanted to mention this evening. First of all, in general, and not specifically, the entire group and organization of staff of the IRI. They are the best, the bravest, and the brightest. They put their souls, hearts, and lives on the line every day, and we are grateful to you all. Thank you. And also, on behalf of the Board of Directors of the International Republican Institute, we want to thank this year's dinner chairman, Mr. John Thain, for his extraordinary efforts in making this evening a success. John Thain is the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange. The exchange is an icon of the American economy, and it is a beacon for enterprise, free enterprise around the globe. John Thain is a visionary leader whose selection to run the NYSE has been heralded by the financial markets worldwide. He's embarked on a mission to transform this 213-year-old, not-for-profit American institution into a public company. He's beginning the 21st century, quickly bringing technology to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. And in the midst of this groundbreaking business achievement, John Thain found time to chair this dinner and to make it a huge success. And we are very, very grateful for his efforts. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your support of the cause of freedom and democracy, and we hope you enjoy the evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome 2005 International Republican Institute Freedom Dinner Chairman John Thain and Senator John McCain. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Thank you. Mr. President, Senator McCain, distinguished guests. I'm John Thain, and it is my honor to welcome you to the International Republican Institute's Freedom Dinner. As this audience knows well, IRI was founded in 1983 following President Reagan's historic speech before the British Parliament in Westminster. Westminster will always be remembered for the President's prophetic prediction that freedom would triumph over communism. And thanks to the generosity of many in this room, IRI has helped to carry the promise of freedom and democracy to over 100 countries. IRI's very existence reminds us how leaders can influence the course of history. The British historian Thomas Carlyle once observed that the history of the world is but the biography of great people. Our celebration tonight speaks to the truth of those words. Think of it, ladies and gentlemen. President Reagan and former President Bush, with powerful, and some might even say supernatural, help from Pope John Paul, defeated an empire and liberated millions. Some historians will always maintain that the Soviet Union simply fell on its own. Well, I think all of us here tonight will agree that it didn't fall, it was pushed. President George W. Bush has courageously reaffirmed that vision. He staked his presidency on a bold strategy to hold high the bright light of freedom and to rid the world of those who would threaten our security here at home. The result, dramatized by Afghans and Iraqis braving bullets to cast ballots, is a renaissance of hope that is spreading across cities and countries of the world. Mr. President, I see the evidence myself. In my day job as the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange, I continually meet entrepreneurs and leaders from other countries, and they say to me, what an exciting time to witness the power of free markets, free ideas, and free people. Through all those eventful years, one man has stood at the side of these three great presidents, someone who can truly be called a freedom fighter, a soldier, sailor, pilot, and senator who put his life on the line to help lead our nation through the great challenges of the 20th century to the awesome promise of the 21st. It has been said that the unexpected often reveals the character of individuals, and each of us maybe has one such event in our lives. Senator McCain has countless examples of heroism from his years as a POW in North Vietnam. Courage, it's often said, is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to hold on a few minutes longer despite our fears. John McCain held on 5 years longer, 2 in solitary confinement. How did he do it? What explains his and his friends' unbelievable bravery and courage? In his book, Faith of My Fathers, the senator wrote that, when I was a young man, I had always thought that glory is the highest ambition. But in that confrontation, I discovered nothing is more liberating than to fight for a cause that is larger than yourself. So they supported each other through the darkest nights of their lives, and every afternoon, before they ate their soup, they hung a makeshift American flag on the wall of their cell, and they recited together the Pledge of Allegiance. Their unbreakable bond and daily ritual filled them with the purpose to see it all through. And when he returned home, he entered politics, and for the last 2 decades, John McCain has been a champion for limited government, a strong defense, and freedom in the world. He's been an inspiration to all who have faced seemingly insurmountable hardship and faced it down. But wherever he's been, whatever he's done, he has never sacrificed his integrity, never lost his independence, and he will always be guided by his love for America and the code of honor with which he lives his life. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairman of IRI, Senator John McCain.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank John Thain for serving as this year's dinner chairman, thanks in large part to John's extraordinary efforts while he was in the middle of a challenging project at his day job. This is the most successful IRI dinner ever. I owe him, and we all owe him, and the cause of freedom owe him a personal debt of gratitude. At every annual dinner, we honor an individual of great distinction. This year, our gathering is a distinction in its own right, as we're privileged to have with us a truly extraordinary guest of honor. Never before has a sitting American president graced IRI's annual dinner, and so for his presence alone, we are grateful. But more than that, for an organization whose staff and volunteers work so selflessly to help the people of other countries claim their right to live with dignity, George W. Bush is not just any president. He has become the world statesman who more than any other has dedicated his presidency to securing the success of liberty abroad. The mission of IRI and its allies to foster liberty in lands unblessed by freedom under this president has become more than ever America's mission and has become a hallmark of America's foreign policy. Because this president knows that the promotion of democracy serves our security interests and is inseparable from the moral foundation of our national character. He understands that the desire for freedom is not a function of culture, religion, or geography. From Ukraine to Kyrgyzstan, Iraq to Afghanistan, Lebanon to Egypt to Palestine, freedoms that were once the privilege of a few are now claimed as the right of all people. There remains much work ahead. In Burma, a brutal military junta uses violence and repression to hold captive an entire population, while an incomparably courageous woman, Aung San Suu Kyi, remains in detention. In Sudan, genocide continues to rage throughout the state of Darfur. Russia, Belarus, and several of the Central Asian nations appear to be moving backward, not forward, on the path to democracy. And throughout the broader Middle East, where one-party rule is the norm, the lack of freedom engenders extremism and calamity. We need not despair in the face of these challenges. We may hope for the best because we're a hopeful people and because we have a president who dares to work for the best. He works to achieve a safer, better, freer world, a world in which governments are chosen, not imposed, a world where freedoms are embraced, not abridged, a world in which there is justice and opportunity for all, not rights and riches for some. In his second inaugural address, the President movingly promised that all who live in tyranny and hopelessness can know the United States will not ignore your oppression or excuse your oppressors. When you stand for your liberty, we will stand with you. Years ago, the President and I were once opponents. Now it is my privilege and honor to stand with him in the great and noble work he has undertaken. Like all of you, and like all who believe in our good cause, I am indebted to and very proud of our honoree. It's my great honor to present the 2005 Freedom Award to our President and my friend, George W. Bush.
Good job, man. Well done. Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks. Please be seated. Thank you for the warm welcome. I thank John for that introduction. John McCain is a man of honor and integrity and personal courage. He's an outstanding chairman for the International Republican Institute. He campaigned with me, for which I was grateful, and one time he said, "You believe in free speech?" I said, "I do." He said, "Why don't you get over to the IRI and give one then?" It was an honor to meet your mother, John, Roberta. There she is. Ms. McCain, it's good to see you. If you're anything like my mother, I'm sure you're telling John what to do. If he's anything like me, he's listening to you about half the time. But thank you very much, John. I appreciate your president, Lauren Craner. He did a fantastic job in our administration as Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy and Human Rights and Labor, and he continues to do good work. I regret Laura's not with us tonight. You probably think she's working on some of her one-liners. She's actually packing her bags because she's off for Jordan and Israel and Egypt to continue to deliver the freedom message. And I can't think of a better messenger. I want to thank Peter Madigan and John Thane. I want to thank the members of Congress who are here tonight. Particularly want to say hello and thanks to my close friend, Ambassador Jerry Bremer, for his fantastic work in Iraq. Thank you, Jerry, for your good job. I'm pleased to know that Paul Wolfowitz is with us tonight, President-elect of the World Bank. I'm going to miss him as a part of my administration. But I'm going to tell you something. The world will be better off with Paul Wolfowitz as the head of the World Bank. I want to thank the members of the Diplomatic Corps, and I want to thank you for this fine award. I understand a little later on you're going to give an award to a true champion of freedom, and that is Pope John Paul II. Everywhere he went, Pope John Paul preached the call of freedom is for every member of the human family. Because the author of life wrote it into our common human nature. And in the end, even the Berlin Wall could not withstand the force of this humble Polish priest who became the Bishop of Rome and a true hero for the ages. Thank you for honoring this good man. I'm here to thank you for supporting the IRI. And I appreciate the work IRI is doing to advance the cause of liberty for more than 2 decades. IRI has been at the forefront of democratic change in more than 100 countries. You've trained the next generation of leaders, you've strengthened political parties, you've monitored elections, and you're helping to build civil societies. You've made an enormous difference in the lives of millions across the world. I hope that makes you feel good. The world is safer and freer and more peaceful because of the International Republican Institute. Thank you for your good work. These are incredibly exciting times. It must be exciting times for you. And they're exciting times for me. They should be exciting times for everybody, because freedom is making unprecedented progress across the globe. In the last 18 months, we've witnessed revolutions of rose, orange, purple, tulip, and cedar. And these are just the beginnings. Across the Caucasus and Central Asia, hope is stirring at the prospect of change, and change will come. Across the broader Middle East, we're seeing the rise of a new generation whose hearts burn for freedom, and they will have it. This is a period of great idealism, when dreams of liberty are coming true for millions. Yet to achieve idealistic goals, we need realistic policies to help nations secure their freedom, and practical strategies to help young democracies consolidate their gains. To help young democracies succeed, we need to recognize that freedom movements can create a vacuum. Democratic change and free elections are exhilarating events. Yet we know from experience they can be followed by moments of uncertainty, when people risk everything to vote. It can raise expectations that their lives will improve immediately. But history teaches us that the path to a free society is long and not always smooth. During my visit to Europe, I stopped in a country that is now in the early stages of its transition from free elections to free society, and that's the nation of Georgia. It's a fantastic honor to represent our country in front of thousands of people and to stand side by side with a true lover of freedom, President Saakashvili. It was an unbelievable experience to stand in Freedom Square to celebrate the peaceful revolution that took place 18 months ago. Yet it has taken nearly 15 years of struggle for the citizens of this young democracy to establish freedom and justice in their country. But I've seen the resolve of Georgia's leaders and the spirit of the Georgian people. And I can assure you, they have the will to succeed, and the United States of America will help them. Almost every new democracy has gone through a period of challenge and confusion. In Slovakia, the Velvet Revolution was followed by a period of neo-authoritarian rule before freedom firmly took hold. In Romania, the communist regime was toppled in 1989, and today the post-communist leadership is still dealing with the legacy of corruption they inherited as they work to build a vibrant democracy. In Ukraine, citizens waited 13 years after independence for the Orange Revolution that solidified their democratic gains. All these countries still have much more work to do, but their people are courageous and their leaders are determined, and with our help, they will prevail. And as we push the freedom agenda, we must remember the history of our own country. The American Revolution was followed by years of chaos. 1783, Congress was chased from Philadelphia by angry veterans demanding back pay, and the Congress stayed on the run for 6 months. Our first effort at a governing charter, the Articles of Confederation, failed miserably. It took several years before we finally adopted our Constitution and inaugurated our first president. It took a 4-year civil war and a century of struggle after that before the promise of our Declaration was extended to all Americans. No nation in history has made the transition from tyranny to a free society without setbacks and false starts. What separates those nations that succeed from those that falter is their progress in establishing free institutions. So to help young democracies succeed, we must help them build free institutions to fill the vacuum created by change. Democracy takes different forms in different cultures. Yet we know that in all cultures, successful democracies are built on certain common foundations. And they include the following rights. First, all successful democracies need freedom of speech, with a vibrant free press that informs the public, ensures transparency, and prevents authoritarian backsliding. Second, all successful democracies need freedom of assembly, so citizens can gather and organize in free associations to press for reform, and so that a peaceful, loyal opposition can provide citizens with real choices. Third, all successful democracies need a free economy to unleash the creativity of its citizens and create prosperity and opportunity and economic independence from the state. Fourth, all democracies need an independent judiciary to guarantee rule of law and assure impartial justice for all citizens. And fifth, all democracies need freedom of worship, because respect for the beliefs of others is the only way to build a society where compassion and tolerance prevail. These are the foundations that sustain human freedom. Societies that lay these foundations not only survive, but thrive. Societies that fail to do so often find they have built their future on sand instead of rock and risk sliding back into tyranny. So we have a great responsibility. We must help these young democracies build the free institutions that will protect their liberty and extend it to future generations. To help young democracies succeed and build these institutions of liberty, we must enlist the help of many individuals and institutions. Non-governmental organizations have a role to play. The United States government has a role to play. And the world's free nations all have important roles to play. To build free institutions, we're counting on groups like IRI. As more and more people rise up to demand their freedom, the world is seeing a proliferation of democratic transitions. For IRI and others in the business of promoting democratic change, this is good news. It means you're in a growth industry. We need you to continue your vital work to help ensure free and fair elections across the world. At the same time, we also need you to focus your skills and experience on what comes after the elections are over and the media has left and the world's attention has turned elsewhere. As new democracies emerge, we need you to help civic associations in those countries transform from regime opponents to issue advocates so they can press legitimate governments for essential reforms. We need you to help the democratic reformers you have trained make the transition from dissidents to elected legislators by teaching them how to build coalitions and set legislative agendas and master unfamiliar skills like constituent service. We need you to help businesses in new market economies organize trade associations and chambers of commerce so they can promote pro-growth economic policies. And we need you to teach newly elected governments the importance of building public support for their policies and programs, as well as how to effectively deal with the free news media. By helping people build these institutions and develop the habits of liberty, you are helping them transform new democracies into lasting free societies. To build free institutions, the United States government has responsibilities. To help meet this goal, since taking office, my administration has provided more than $4.6 billion for programs to support democratic change around the world. And we've requested over $1.3 billion for these efforts in our 2006 budget. Our 2006 budget also requests $80 million for the National Endowment of Democracy, more than double NED's budget when I took office. The reason I bring this up is I want you to understand that we have funding, but we will focus that funding to help new democracies after the elections are over. We must also improve the responsiveness of our government to help nations emerging from tyranny and war. Democratic change can arrive suddenly, and that means our government must be able to move quickly to provide needed assistance. So last summer, my administration established a new Office of Reconstruction and Stabilization in the State Department, led by Ambassador Carlos Pascual. This new office is charged with coordinating our government's civilian efforts to meet an essential mission, helping the world's newest democracies make the transition to peace and freedom in a market economy. You know, one of the lessons we learned from our experience in Iraq is that while military personnel can be rapidly deployed anywhere in the world, the same is not true of U.S. government civilians. Many fine civilian workers from almost every department of our government volunteered to serve in Iraq. When they got there, they did an amazing job under extremely difficult and dangerous circumstances. And America appreciates their service and sacrifice. But the process of recruiting and staffing the Coalition Provisional Authority was lengthy and it was difficult. That's why one of the first projects of the new Office of Reconstruction and Stabilization is to create a new active response corps made up of foreign and civil service officers who can deploy quickly to crisis situations as civilian first responders. This new corps will be on call, ready to get programs running on the ground in days and weeks instead of months and years. The The 2006 budget requests $24 million for this office and $100 million for a new conflict response fund. If a crisis emerges and assistance is needed, the United States of America will be ready. This office will also work to expand our use of civilian volunteers from outside our government who have the right skills and are willing to serve in these missions. After the liberation of Iraq and Afghanistan, Americans from all walks of life stepped forward to help these newly liberated nations recover. Last summer, a Lancaster, Ohio police officer named Brian Fisher volunteered to spend a year in Baghdad training Iraqi police. Brian says the Iraqi people have been under a dictatorship and now they're moving toward democracy, and I want to do something to help. What a fantastic spirit that Brian showed. But he's not alone. Last May, a Notre Dame law school professor named Jimmy Groulet helped train 39 Iraqi judges, some of whom will conduct the trials of Saddam Hussein and other senior members of his regime. Because of efforts of people like him and Brian, these trials will be fair and transparent. These are ordinary Americans who are making unbelievable contributions to freedom's cause. And the spirit of the citizenship of this country is remarkable. And we're going to put that spirit to work to advance the cause of liberty and to build a safer world. We're improving the capacity of our military to assist nations that are making democratic transitions. In Iraq and Afghanistan, our men and women in uniform are serving with unbelievable courage and distinction, and they make this country incredibly proud. The main purpose of our military is to win the war on terror, is to find and defeat the terrorists overseas so we do not have to face them here at home. A major goal of our military is to train Iraqi and Afghan security forces so these nations can defend their people and fight the terrorists themselves. But at the same time, America's armed forces are also undertaking a less visible but increasingly important task, helping these people of these nations build civil societies from the rubble of oppression. In Afghanistan, U.S. and coalition forces are deploying provincial reconstruction teams in remote regions of that country. These teams are helping the Afghan government to fix schools, dig wells, build roads, repair hospitals, and build confidence in the Afghan government's ability to deliver real change in people's lives. In Iraq, soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division launched Operation Adam Smith, provided Iraqi entrepreneurs with small business loans, and taught them the important skills to run a business like accounting and marketing and writing business plans. To give our military more resources for this vital work, we are rebalancing our forces, moving people out of skills that are in low demand, such as heavy artillery, and adding more military police and civil affairs specialists that are needed in these types of situations. By transforming our military, we will make our armed forces faster, more agile, and more lethal. And we will make them more effective in helping societies transition from war and despotism to freedom and democracy. To build free institutions, all free nations have responsibilities. We know that democracies do not foment terror or invade their neighbors. Democratic societies are peaceful societies, which is why, for the sake of peace, the world's established democracies must help the world's newest democracies succeed. The United States will continue to call upon our friends and allies across the world to help in this noble cause. Today, many nations are stepping forward with practical help. And some of the most active countries are those who've had recent experience with tyrants themselves. Hungary has established an international center for democratic transition to share its experiences with emerging democracies. Lithuania is now preparing to deploy a provincial reconstruction team in western Afghanistan. Slovakia is bringing Iraqi political leaders to their country to show them firsthand how a nation moves from dictatorship to democracy. With the help of IRI, Poland and Lithuania and Latvia are working with civil society leaders in Belarus to bring freedom to Europe's last dictatorship. Bahrain and Jordan, the Czech Republic, and Britain and Italy are hosting hundreds of Iraqi judges so they can study modern legal techniques that will help Iraq establish the rule of law. Many nations are contributing troops for stability operations. In Afghanistan, 40 countries have forces on the ground. And NATO has taken charge of the International Security Assistance Force in Kabul. In Iraq, 30 nations have forces deployed. And NATO is helping to train Army officers and police and civilian administrators of a new Iraq. This is incredibly important work, and I will remind the leaders of free countries how important this work is. And it's not easy work. It's tough work. As we're seeing in the Middle East, freedom often has deadly enemies. Men who celebrate murder, incite suicide, and thirst for absolute power. By working together to aid democratic transitions, we will isolate and defeat the forces of terror and ensure a peaceful world for generations to come. Today, much of our focus is on the broader Middle East, because I understand that 60 years of Western nations excusing and accommodating the lack of freedom in that region did nothing to make us safe. The Middle East remains a place where freedom does not flourish. It will remain a place of stagnation and resentment and violence ready for export. The United States has adopted a new policy, a forward strategy of freedom in the Middle East, a strategy that recognizes the best way to defeat the ideology that uses terror as a weapon is to spread freedom and democracy. And we're beginning to see the effects of this new approach. Iraq and Afghanistan have held free elections and are now building free societies. In Afghanistan, they have for the first time a democratically elected president, and they are now seeing the rebirth of civil society in a place that until recently had only known the terror of the Taliban. Iraqis now have an elected transitional national assembly, a new prime minister, and they are on their way to writing a new constitution for a free Iraq. In this vital work, Iraqis and Afghans have the support of the American people, and thankfully, the support of the International Republican Institute. The Palestinian people have gone to the polls and have chosen a leader committed to negotiation instead of violence. And now we must help them build free institutions that will be a foundation for lasting peace. I've asked Jim Wolfenson to help President Abbas build a modern economy and lasting political institutions. If we want to have two states living side by side in peace, the world must insist that the Palestinians develop the institutions necessary for a free, democratic society to grow and emerge. Egypt will hold its first multi-party presidential election this fall. The success of this important step can be advanced by the presence of international monitors and by rules that allow for a real campaign. In Lebanon, the citizens of that nation rose up to demand their independence and will vote in elections that are set to start at the end of this month. Those elections must go forward with no outside influence. And when the Lebanese people have chosen their leaders, the world's free nations will be there to help them build a lasting democracy. In these countries and across the world, those who claim their liberty will have an unwavering ally in the United States. This administration will stand with the democratic reformers, no matter how hard it gets. We have a responsibility to build a more peaceful world. And we know that by extending liberty to millions who have not known it, we will advance the cause of freedom and the cause of peace. And we're confident. We are confident in the future because we know that the future belongs to freedom. And we know the tree of liberty begins as a sapling, vulnerable to violent winds and gathering storms. Yet if nurtured and protected, it will grow into a mighty oak that can withstand any storm. And when it does, the very winds that once threatened it will carry its seeds across borders and barriers to take root in other lands. We will encourage freedom's advance. We will nurture its progress. And we will help the nations that choose it to navigate the pitfalls that follow. This is the challenge of a new century. It is the calling of our time, and America will do its duty. May God bless you all. Thank you.
I want to do two real quick things. I want to tell everybody that this dinner has, as John McCain said, been the most successful dinner in the history of IRI, and we have raised over $1 million tonight. And I will tell you that behind every successful dinner, there's a team of people, but there is nobody better at this than Carla Udi, and I'd like you all to give her a big round of applause. She is a one-woman wrecking crew. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who's been a longtime personal friend of mine, but more importantly, a longtime family friend of Senator McCain's. His father, Bob Craner, was in the Hanoi Hilton with Senator McCain, and Lauren Craner came to Washington, D.C. to work for Senator McCain. He came here to the IRI some years ago after being at the State Department, and as the President said, went back to the State Department and has now come to the IRI again to continue his passion for the programs that we run, the important things that we do, and so I give you my friend Lauren Craner.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your introduction. I'm very happy to have rejoined you, Senator McCain, and the rest of IRI's board and staff. I'm deeply grateful to the President for his words this evening. I also want to thank Carla Udi, Judy Van Rest, and especially our dinner chair, John Thane. Thank you. As I mentioned, as Peter mentioned, I returned here last summer. I want to begin by thanking my predecessor at IRI, George Folsom. As some of you know, George spent the last 10 months in Baghdad, and he deserves a great deal of gratitude from all of us. I returned last August to a very different IRI. The staff is 3 times as large, there are many new faces, and the budget has quadrupled. But those are not the most important differences. When I ran IRI back in the 1990s, democracy was a good and noble endeavor. But after 9/11, with President Bush's decision that in fighting against terrorism, we must also stand for democracy, IRI's work has become a strategic imperative. We at IRI welcome those great expectations. Today, from Bishkek to Bucharest, from Havana to Harare, IRI staff, many of them foreign nationals, are working successfully to ensure that millions of men and women are able to decide their own futures. IRI is in fact now on our second generation of democracy builders, and by that I mean that Poles, Slovaks, Serbs, and others that IRI helped a decade ago are now giving their knowledge and experiences to men and women in places like Iraq, Belarus, and Cuba. As some of you know, I can talk for hours about IRI, but we did promise that you'd be gone by 9 tonight. So this evening we have a very short video presentation on some of IRI's recent work. Thank you very much.
Our country has accepted obligations that are difficult to fulfill and would be dishonorable to abandon. Yet because we have acted in the great liberating tradition of this nation, tens of millions have achieved their freedom. And as hope kindles hope, millions more will find it. By our efforts, we have lit a fire as well, a fire in the minds of men. It warms those who feel its power. It burns those who fight its progress. And one day, this untamed fire of freedom will reach the darkest corners of our world.
On Saturday, October 9th, the Afghan people went to the polls to freely elect their head of state for the first time in their 5,000-year history. In a breathtaking show of support for democracy, more than 8 million Afghans, both men and women, stood in line for hours to cast their vote despite threats of violence. Throughout the process, IRI conducted voter and civic education programs. On Election Day, IRI observers watched as Afghans peacefully chose Hamid Karzai as the first president of Afghanistan.
I must thank, truly from my heart, on behalf of our people, the United States of America, its people, for what you have done to free us from the tyranny of terrorism and the Taliban.
On November 21st, Ukraine's election officials were prepared to declare the government-backed candidate the winner. The Ukrainian people believed the election to be rigged, and IRI observer groups agreed. The coming days and weeks would put Ukraine on a new course towards democracy and would empower the Ukrainian people. This was the beginning of the Orange Revolution. Demanding a new election, free of government intimidation, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians filled the streets and gathered in Kiev's Independence Square and across the country. A surprise ruling by Ukraine's Supreme Court found the November 21st election invalid and called for a new election on December 26th. Viktor Yushchenko won and was sworn in as Ukraine's third president since independence. In April, President Yushchenko traveled to the United States and thanked IRI for its work in Ukraine and during the 2004 elections.
Дякуючи вам, дякуючи міжнародним спостерігачам, міжнародному республіканському інституту, ми вийшли на чесні вибори 3-го туру.
On January 30th, Freedom Day, the Iraqi people inspired the world with their courage and defiance. Despite the threats of violence, Iraqis took their first step on the road to democracy and went to the polls to cast their vote, not for a candidate, but for freedom. Acts of individual heroism were not uncommon in the lead up to the election. IRI worked with thousands of Iraqis who risked their lives as candidates and in get out the vote and voter education campaigns. And on election day, Iraqis celebrated the simple act of voting and raised their ink-stained fingers as a sign of victory. Their act of bravery was one more example that freedom and democracy are the desire of all peoples.
للمعهد الجمهوري الدولي في العراق حضور واضح وواسع وله تعامل كبير مع منظمات المجتمع المدني ومع الشخصيات السياسية التي كانت تحتل المناصب بعد سقوط النظام. يوم الانتخابات كان فرحة كبيرة جدا.
Democracy continues to grow in Asia, Latin America, and Africa.
IRI has helped to bring freedom to people in Ukraine and Africa, Serbia, Latin America, Albania, Afghanistan, Iraq, and many more places. All in all, IRI has helped to plant the seeds of popular government in more than 75 nations.
In China, opposition to democracy remains entrenched, but Chinese citizens continue to push for political reform and greater freedoms. IRI has been advancing village elections and legal reforms. In El Salvador, IRI worked with Hernando de Soto, political parties, and the private sector on market-based solutions to poverty. In the March presidential elections, IRI election monitors also witnessed the country's highest voter turnout in more than a decade. And in Kenya, IRI is building on a decade of work that culminated in the 2002 transition to democracy. In 2004, IRI and Citizens Against Violence worked to end political violence by youth, which helped to mitigate youth violence during the opposition's recent party elections.
IRI staff and volunteers are working in more than 24 countries, teaching citizens about the ideals of democracy and the daily work of democracy. Active citizenship, fair elections, responsive legislatures, and energetic political parties. This work carries out a basic commitment of our country and its people.
IRI's work is inspired by the long tradition of our country and the vision of President Ronald Reagan, who in his own words set out to foster the infrastructure of democracy, which allows a people to choose their own way, their own culture.
To reconcile their own differences through peaceful means. For the task I've set forth will long outlive our own generation. But together, we too have come through the worst. Let us now begin a major effort to secure the best. A crusade for freedom that will engage the faith and fortitude of the next generation. For the sake of peace and justice, let us move toward a world in which all people are at last free to determine their own destiny.
Now in its third decade of helping breathe the life of democracy and freedom to people without hope all across the world, the International Republican Institute stands upon a solid record of achievement. With leadership and a continued commitment to the fundamental principles upon which all great democracies are based, the IRI will continue its mission of hope for decades to come.
It's now my privilege to present the other IRI Freedom Award to a true giant of the 20th century. When he passed away earlier this year, Pope John Paul II left behind a world fundamentally changed because of his presence, a course of history altered by his labors. In many ways, John Paul II was a study in opposites. Having lived through dehumanizing communism at home, he bravely stood up for the rights of individuals. As the most powerful man in the world's largest church, he bent humbly each year to wash the feet of 12 priests. Reflecting daily on the divine, he had an astonishing humanity that led him to forgive even his would-be assassin. And as the first Polish pope in history, he was both a patriot who loved his homeland and a citizen of the world. From the first days of his papacy, it was clear where the pope stood in the battle between freedom and oppression. Traveling to his homeland just months after his inauguration, he challenged the people of that captive land. "You are men," he told the assembled crowds. "You have dignity. Don't crawl on your bellies." The Pope went on to embrace l'equivalenza and solidarity, infusing this movement with great weight and authority. He stood up for fundamental human rights across the globe and rejected the communist system that so plainly subverted them. He brought his message to people of all continents, erasing distinctions of race or nationality, and he rejected the relativism that so often serves as a dictator's last excuse for oppression. In short, the world is a better place, freer, more humane, more joyful, because of Pope John Paul II's role in it. To give a sense for John Paul's remarkable accomplishments, we have with us tonight a man who knows of what he speaks. Michael Novak, the George Frederick Jewett Scholar in Religion, Philosophy, and Public Policy at the American Enterprise Institute, is the author of no less than 25 books on philosophy and theology. His latest work is entitled The Universal Hunger for Liberty, a phrase which I believe the recently departed Pope would find deeply attractive. But before we hear from Mr. Novak, we are honored to have with us Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, who will accept the Freedom Award on behalf of the Pope. Cardinal McCarrick is himself a great advocate of human rights, religious freedom, and other fundamental liberties, and he has traveled the world to promote these causes. It is most fitting, then, that to accept an award for the most humane of men, Pope John Paul II. We have here tonight one of his deputies, a man who finds his life's work in the concerns of all humanity, Cardinal McCarrick. Well, the award is around here somewhere.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. I only hold the applause because I know that you're supposed to get out of here by 9 o'clock, and I don't want to get blamed. But I take the applauses for the great Holy Father John Paul II. As Senator McCain said so beautifully, the ideals of the late Holy Father are certainly very much the ideals of IRI, and I think he would be so pleased to know of your work, to know of what you do, to know of how you reach out in so many areas. The centerpiece of the teaching of Pope John Paul II was the dignity of the human person. And the dignity of the human person demands that that person has rights, right to life, right to liberty, right to express oneself, all those rights that are part of democracy. And these were the warp and woof of all the teaching and all the work of Pope John Paul II. I had the privilege of knowing him for 30 years and of loving him. An extraordinary human being, a brilliant man, a man of extraordinary courage, but a man of remarkable warmth and goodness. And I think that's how he was able to change the world in a certain sense. And it is a great honor, I think, for all of us in the Catholic community to see him honored by IRI. I'm sure that I'll be able to present this to his successor, Pope Benedict XVI, who is very much not a carbon copy, because you can't have a carbon copy of a special man like Karol Wojtyła, but who is a man who has always followed the same thoughts, the same desire, the same courageous stands against terrorism and tyranny in the world as his predecessor. So on behalf of Pope John Paul II, now very happy at home in heaven, I'm sure, and on behalf of his successor, I'm very honored to be able to accept this very important award, because not only of what it says, but of what it means to us who are all working for this dignity of the human person, which is the center and basis of all democracy. So God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Please welcome Mr. Michael Novak.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak before an institute whose work I so much admire, and I'm happy to take part in. Recently, I received 2 emails from strangers who identified themselves as evangelical Christians, who wanted to tell me that they counted John Paul II as their Pope too. One of them wrote that John Paul II was one of the most Christ-like men since the time of Christ himself. Now, since that was his main task, to be a stand-in or vicar for Christ, I think the Pope would have liked that. I don't think his humility would have allowed him to believe it. So in a sense, it was something of an accident that this Pope also became one of the greatest forces for human liberty in recent centuries. His primary interest was not political. His primary role was not political. His primary love was not political. Yet off to the side, as it were, the political winds stirred by his pontificate reached hurricane strength. His sheer presence as Bishop of Rome made it impossible for any abuse of human rights in Poland and surrounding territories, any clubbing of a priest with iron bars, any beating of a dock worker in Gdansk, any jailing of a journalist in Slovakia, made it impossible for these to slip by without an international spotlight being flicked upon it from the Vatican. His sheer presence opened up vast spaces of civil society in Poland and its neighbors. And this man was gutsy enough to thrust himself into every one of those nations in order to create still more opportunities for people to begin to live and to think and to act as free women and free men. Be not afraid, he said. The light of freedom, Karl Wojtyla believed from a very young age, is a flame within us that comes directly from God, a light from the Creator's own inner light, which makes us come alive with insight and gives us the power to choose our own destiny. In this, we are the creatures most like God in all of creation. When he was just 19 in 1939, stepping outside the Wawel Cathedral where he had just assisted at Mass, the young Karol Wojtyla saw the first German Stukas banking, screaming in, and strafing homes along the riverbank below. That is where his widowed father lived, and he ran downhill until his breath burned his lungs to be certain that his father was unharmed. Young Karol learned through resistance that inner liberty can survive even under occupation and totalitarian control. But he also knew that humans do not live by inner life alone. As he matured, he came to see how rich and complex liberty is. From inner liberty, one eventually and urgently wants political liberty. But given political liberty, one learns very soon that without economic liberty, liberty from poverty, people will not long be satisfied merely with the chance to vote every 2 or 3 years. And he learned also that neither political nor economic liberty can come into existence or be long maintained without cultural, moral, spiritual, and religious liberty. Liberty of conscience, of enterprise, of ideas, of the spirit, of science, and the arts. Karol Wojtyla was not just a holy man and a fearless bishop. He was also a professional philosopher and a strong and original thinker. We honor him not only in gratitude for how his fearlessness helped to alter the map of Europe, and not only for how he helped to bring down the Berlin Wall, which is one of the first aims he spoke of after he became Pope, and to provoke the collapse of the Soviet Empire by pointing to its spiritual emptiness. In short, we honor him not only for his actions in expanding the dimensions of liberty in our world, but also for the volumes of his written teachings about liberty. The letters he wrote to the world, those short treatises called encyclicals, will long outlive him. We recall with particular gratitude his letter of 1991, the 100th year, summarizing the lessons about political and economic and cultural liberty that had been learned by the popes of the bloody and suffering last 100 years. Here in particular, he introduced the concept of moral ecology, that complex of image and story and emotion, of passion and spirit and attitude, within which alone liberty can come into its own. This is a dimension of the free society, the cultural dimension, the moral ecology of liberty, that the world has too long ignored. Many at IRI also remember that John Paul II wrote with Cardinal Ratzinger, his successor, 2 great letters on the Christian understanding of liberty, addressed directly to the liberation theologians of Latin America, who were introducing into Latin America the very same twisted lines of Marxist thinking that had so impoverished Europe. They did it for good intentions to help the poor. But they chose methods which the Pope well recognized. These 2 letters were intellectual demolitions of a very high order, bristling with shrewd and practical distinctions. When under the Reagan Revolution, democracies arose all through Latin America, it turned out that the liberation theologians, having prepared themselves for Marxism rather than for democracy, were as hollow as those letters pointed out. In courageous action, in symbol, in deed, and in profound theorizing about the relations of democracy and human rights, John Paul II leapt to the front ranks of the great leaders of liberty in the 20th century. Wilson, Churchill, Roosevelt, Reagan, Thatcher, he belongs in their number. From the Philippines through Chile and all of Latin America, including his memorable reawakening of long-repressed Cuba, and on through Africa and Asia, and then his own beloved Poland and Eastern Europe, John Paul II spread the inner fire of liberty and helped to nudge, stir, and even to open the exit door for several standard bearers of oppression. When he died just 6 weeks ago, the political world had a radically different shape from when he was elected Pope in 1978. So it's fitting on this, what would have been his 85th birthday today, we honor him. Not many in the 20th century, nor even in the 3 or 4 centuries before that, advanced the cause of political liberty more dramatically in more places on the planet. And that was not even John Paul II's first priority. That was for him an aside. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, it's 8:45, so I've got a few minutes to speak. I want to say 2 things. First of all, thank you again to everybody at all of these tables tonight. And if you look in the programs tonight, you're going to see your names and the names of your dinner mates tonight, and they made the difference. And you can see that this money goes to a good cause. We work hard to do it, and we spend it very, very carefully, judiciously, and well. And second of all, don't be strangers. www.iri.org. We need your involvement as much as we need your money. And with that, I'd like to say on behalf of the Board of Directors of the International Republican Institute, the Freedom Dinner is adjourned, and coffee and dessert will be served out in the hallway. Thank you, and have a great night.